Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I'll say more about them in my conclusion remarks. But to first of all, Senator Dodd and Senator Shelby, thanks for continuing your dialogue with each other, and thanks for coming to the type of agreement that is allowed to get this extremely important bill on the floor. With the financial collapse of 2008, there are a number of issues that simply have to be addressed, and this is the appropriate forum now for all of those issues to come forward and have debate on both sides of the aisle to hopefully at the end of the day come up with the right kind of product that's going to make sure that situations like 2008 never occur again. And to my chairman and my partner on the Committee on Agriculture, she is my dear friend, and we have worked very closely together on so many issues, including this one. And when we have our differences, we're able to disagree in a very professional way, and I'm very appreciative to her as well as to her friendship. Mr. President, we all know that appropriate regulation of derivatives, and specifically the swaps market, is a critical component of this legislation, and the Agriculture Committee is responsible for the oversight of the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, which will become one of the key regulators of the swaps market. As the ranking member on the Ag Committee, I have the responsibility to ensure that we get this right. The Agriculture Committee has a history of not falling subject to partisan influence. We have a long tradition of checking our partisan politics at the door in an effort to reach consensus so that both Republicans and Democrats can then support our products on the floor. For instance, the Agriculture Committee facilitated a bipartisan deal to close the Enron loophole back in 2008. Then Chairman Senator Harkin and I worked across party lines with Senators Snowe, Feinstein, Levin, and Cantwell to ensure that electronic trading facilities offering contracts that perform a significant price discovery function are properly regulated in a transparent way. Earlier this week, the CFTC used this new authority to subject 7 natural gas contracts to increased oversight. That is an example of how laws written with bipartisan agreements yield real results. Derivatives legislation should have been handled this way too. It should have come out of the Ag Committee as a bipartisan product. My staff and Chairman Lincoln's staff spent 5 months crafting a bipartisan derivatives bill that should have been reported from the committee with support from both sides. Unfortunately, things fell apart just as we were about to circulate an agreed-upon discussion draft. This discussion draft that would have required clearing of swaps by swaps dealers and others who contribute to systemic risk. It would have provided the SEC and the CFTC with the authority to establish capital and margin requirements. It would have allowed the CFTC to impose aggregate position limits. And most importantly, it would have provided the much-needed transparency that has been absent from the swaps market. This would have represented a 180-degree shift from current law that was in place in 2008. Transparency, Mr. President, is the key here. And under our agreed-upon discussion draft, 100% of all trades in the swaps and derivatives market would have been out in the open and available to regulators to review in real time. Unfortunately, this language is not part of the underlying bill, and instead we are faced with a derivatives product crafted without input from Republicans. A derivatives product that reflects an agreement between 2 Democratic committee chairmen and the administration. Republicans were not even invited into the room to provide input. The product they have developed will have many unfortunate consequences for Main Street businesses that has nothing to do with creating this financial meltdown. I fear what I believe to be unintended consequences resulted from applying complicated regulations too broadly will subject our American businesses to more risk and not less. For example, this legislation would force the Farm Credit System institutions to run their interest rate swaps through a clearinghouse, which will result in additional costs in the form of higher interest rates to their customers without doing anything to lessen systemic risk. And let me be clear as to who this will ultimately affect: our farmers and ranchers, our electric cooperatives, and our ethanol facilities who seek financing from these institutions. Institutions like CoBank will be forced to clear their swaps and execute them on a trading facility, which will impose significant new costs and result in higher interest rates for their customer, or worse, discourage them from managing their risk, which will again result in higher costs for their borrowers. And why? Because this legislation broadly applies regulation treating all financial institutions exactly the same. CoBank and Goldman Sachs are not the same and should not be regulated in the same manner. CoBank should have the option to clear their swaps and not be mandated to do so. This legislation would also prevent John Deere Credit from hedging its interest rate risk except through a clearinghouse. Again, this will result in less attractive credit arrangements for farmers who need financing to buy tractors and combines. The same can be said for consumers who would like favorable financing arrangements with Ford Motor Credit to buy a car. They will not be allowed the best deal because Ford Motor Credit is now going to be forced to take on additional cost when hedging their interest rates. Can anyone tell me why we are treating John Deere and Ford Motor Credit exactly the same as Goldman Sachs? Also, entities like Koch Industries, who are hedging their risk and also engaged in developing products for their customers' hedging needs, should not inadvertently be captured in a new regulatory category designed to apply to big financial dealers. But that is exactly what this legislation does. Koch and Goldman Sachs swaps businesses would essentially be regulated in the same way. Treating these entities like dealers may force them to stop offering these products to their customers, in which case their customers will have no other options but to seek products from the large dealers, like Goldman Sachs and other Wall Street bankers. Today I heard that the stock price of Goldman Sachs is up, and this explains it. They will get increased opportunities to make more money under this legislation. Why do we want to essentially lessen competition and drive all of the swaps businesses to those that are the most systemically risky? Or, even worse, drive them offshore where we cannot regulate them? Banks like Goldman Sachs may even be forced out of the swaps business if this legislation becomes law, which begs the question: who will then be left to offer these risk management tools to our constituent businesses? Businesses rely on swaps as a very legitimate option to help them alleviate risk inherent to their business. But if no one is left to sell them this protection, they will be forced to hold the risk on their books. And why on earth would Congress advance legislation that would actually prevent the businesses in each of our states from properly managing their risk, especially in these difficult times? The American public wants to know why we cannot target these new regulations so that Wall Street is regulated appropriately without punishing the businesses that they rely on every day. And I myself would like to know the same thing. Unfortunately, I think I already know the answer. And it has absolutely nothing to do with regulating Wall Street. When the Obama administration realized that the Committee on Agriculture was on the verge of producing a derivatives regulation package that could have appealed to both Republicans and Democrats, they scrambled to kill the deal. You see, to the extent that any aspect of the financial regulatory reform package has Republican support, they can no longer play politics with this issue. If we produce a bill that has the support of several Republicans, then they can no longer blame us for holding up this process, which would cause the administration to lose the message they are pushing in hopes that voters will forget about health care. And their message is simple. They want to be able to tell the public that Republicans are opposed to regulating Wall Street. Well, that is disingenuous at best and totally false at worst. Republicans are just as anxious as Democrats to address what went wrong on Wall Street, and frankly, it is long overdue. Why has the administration waited almost 18 months to push financial regulatory reform? Why are they trying to cut Republicans out of the process? Is it that they want an issue that will drag on into the election season, not a solution that will truly protect customers on Main Street? I wish we were here today debating a derivatives product that had input from senators on both sides of the aisle and perhaps a little less input from the administration. The American people expect the administration to implement the laws that Congress passes, but they elected us to write those laws. I feel certain that we could have done a much better job had we been allowed to work in a more bipartisan way. Unfortunately, I have to encourage my colleagues to oppose the derivatives portion of this bill because I think it will have undesirable consequences for Main Street businesses and consumers who are already struggling in this weakened economy. We will have amendments to correct the deficiencies in this bill, and I hope we will receive bipartisan support for those amendments because they truly will reflect common sense solutions to the complex derivatives issue. And let me close by saying that I know Senators Dodd, Senator Lincoln, Senator Shelby, all of us wanted at the end of the day to develop a bipartisan bill. And I hope that we can still do that. I see my friend Senator Warner is on the floor. He and I have had some conversations about trying to meld some of our ideas together. And I know he's worked very closely with my dear friend Senator Corker from this side of the aisle. And now that we have this bill to the floor, I hope that we can get by the rhetoric, that we can all say our piece, and that we can roll up our sleeves and do what the American people want to see us to do, which is work together for their best interests. They're the ones that are going to suffer from what comes out of here, or they're the ones that will benefit from what comes out of the Senate. Senator Dodd is a dear friend, and we have had many, many conversations about this bill. I know what's in his heart, and I know he wants to get this done in the right way. Likewise with my dear friend Senator Lincoln. So as we move ahead now, I'm just very hopeful that we can settle down to the real business that the Senate is famous for, and that's having real hardcore debate on issues, because these are extremely tough. And there has not been a more complex issue that we've had to deal with in my now going on 8 years in this body. But the minds here are very capable of resolving these issues, and we can do so with good ideas from both sides of the aisle. And I'm very hopeful at the end of the day that we will come out with a product that the American people can look back and say, wow, that's the way the Senate is supposed to work. And the people that we sent there to do the people's business have, in fact, put together a good product that's going to benefit America, going to benefit American business, and most importantly, will benefit Americans. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield back.
Before he leaves.